Hey guys, welcome back. This is part 2 of the graveyard tutorial. The first section of this tutorial, of this part of the tutorial, is going to be painting. First things we do is we actually paint everything. That way we've got a good base in case we miss anything with our texture materials. And that way we have good color on everything. I'm actually going to be doing 2 different colors of stone. I'm going to do a gray stone on the pillars and the grave markers and the platform here. I'm going to do a brown stone here. Everything else is going to have a green base to it. I'm going to actually add a path, and we'll texture that later. But I'm going to mention certain techniques as I go that I will actually be demonstrating in my next video, which will be the mausoleum that goes on top. Mainly what we're doing is we're going to be blocking out the colors and painting with the blocks of color, then doing what we call a wash, which I'll explain in a later tutorial, and then dry brushing. Washes are, I'm going to go ahead and explain a little bit now. Washes are thinner paints. You can mix your own, but for this, I'm just going to be moving pretty quickly. As a result, I'm using the pre-made washes by Citadel. I'm using Nolan Oil, Agrax Earthshade, and for some rust on the bars here, I'm probably going to use a Reikland Flesh Shade, and then add some ground up pastel. That last part will be in the last part of the video. But you block out your colors, then you wash to get into your lowlights, and then you dry brush to bring out all your details. As I go, I'll explain it, and some of it will be in time lapse like the first part. But the first thing I'm going to do is start by painting the parts that I want to be, my brain just hiccup, the brownstone. We're going to start with a nice tan. It's actually, this is Desert Sand by Americana. A lot of people say that you have to do the expensive paints on all this. For a lot of what I do, I literally just use 50-cent Walmart paints. You can get them at any of your craft stores or your local Walmart. But I'm going to do this way so you can actually see what I'm doing on the aerial here. And literally I'm just painting the bricks with this tan. Right now I'm using a detail brush. That way I can get the edges, and then I'll hit it pretty hard with a wider brush. At this stage, you don't really need to worry about getting it on other parts. I'm doing a little bit of precision on the top to save myself some cleanup later. But when you get down to the bottom, since you're going to have to paint the base anyway, you don't have to worry so much about it. And I'll show you what I'm talking about here in a second. Now, normally I would go ahead and do both sides of that, so you'd be able to, I'd be able to just move on. But I'm going to show you what I'm doing here. I did that band, and now I take a wider brush, and I can literally just brush it on like this. And if you look here, I'm getting some on the actual base, and I'm not worried about that for now, because when we come back, I'll be hitting that with a green to go under my static grass. And that just gives me a nice tan base for my fence. I'm going to rotate that so I can see the other end here real quick. And as you can see, like I say, right along here at the base, and actually just see, so I can exaggerate it, you can see that. I'm going to use this same base coat for this fence and everything around the gate. I'll rotate that so you can see what I'm doing on this side. Can you get a good one, good on that one, Bo? One of the things I want to tell you is, please note I didn't do a solid single color on that. I'm going to show both sides there. And there's a reason for that. In nature, you rarely find solid contiguous colors, but variance. And variance is actually what makes this work. That's how, like I was saying with the texture medium, you don't want everything to be perfect because that really does not sell in nature. Now for this section, I've got this gate, which is steel. I'll lift it up so you can see it. Got this gate, which will be steel, and I've got these two pillars on either side. These pillars I'm going to do in brown stone. Then these I'm going to do in gray stone. Really need a third camera to do this properly. So the next part is going to be to do the gray. I'm going to start out with a slate gray. A lot of companies have a dove gray, which is about the same color. As you can see, it's a pretty bluish gray. And George, that's what I was talking about for that neutral density color. And then literally, please note again that I am not worried about the edges here. This is to get the base color on, and I'm going to have to paint around that anyway. And there will be a layer of material over it as well. So now while I'm doing this, one of the things that I want to address is priming. I would not recommend painting directly on the plastics. Get a primer. For miniatures, I recommend either Army Painter or Citadel, or I use Vallejo, which sets the industry standard. You can use things like Krylon Fusion for plastic. If you don't have a dry brush, then the Army Painter, not a dry brush, but an airbrush, the Army Painter and the Krylon Fusion and the Citadel primers are all very good. Well, Krylon Fusion's a little thicker. The others are made for miniatures, so the paint's thinner, so it doesn't obscure detail. When I get to my tutorials on how to actually paint miniatures, I will give a little bit of a rundown on paints. Like I say, I use the Vallejo Surface Primer. It's a polyurethane, It is tough as nails and does this very well. Again, you can see I am purposely leaving parts lighter and darker than other parts because natural stone, especially slate, and that's kind of what this would be, has patterns in it. And I'm actually adding some of those patterns right here. Now I'm going to be quiet for the rest of this. I'm going to go ahead and get these and these painted, and then we'll pick up here in a couple minutes. Okay, as you can see, and part of the reason I did that the way I did was to reiterate that at this point in time, detail doesn't really matter. A lot of people look at miniatures and go, well, I could never do that. Well, I'm going to show you when I'm doing this. The only reason I'm using the little detail brush is to get into crevices right now. But when I'm doing this, the details don't matter. The techniques are so simple that anybody can do them, and they will bring out the details for you. The miniatures literally almost paint themselves. Now, I admit what I'm doing is broader strokes than most of my pieces. And I missed the entire back of that gravestone. Bo, why didn't you tell me?
It's because I was paying more attention to the camera work rather than the work that you were actually doing.
Paying more attention to Tiamat up there on the shelf, huh?
Okay, you got me.
Actually, while I'm working on this, since I got this, go ahead and show them that giant piece there. That is going to be I'm not going to do a tutorial on that. I am, however, going to do a time lapse of the entire process and post that online because, well, it's the same techniques as I'll teach you for everything else. And therefore, you don't need to know what I'm doing. You can just watch and enjoy. Okay. This is the base. The base coating on most of this is done. And we're going to take a small break to let it dry. And we'll be back in a couple minutes. That's for sink. Now, this next part, I'm doing the washes. We'll have another break before we continue. I'm going to do all the washes and the dry brushes. And then I'm going to touch up, well, I'm going to do the stone. And then I'm going to touch up the black so you can see how I'm going to do the metal, which is going to involve a dry brush, then a wash, and then a texture, which will give it a nice, lovely rusted appearance. But first we're going to do the stone. I'm going to start with the brown stone. And for that, we're going to use Agrax Earthshade. There's any number of companies that sell a chocolate brown. And when I do the tutorial on how to make a wash, basically you take it and you add water. You want to make it so it's runny, not watery. And I'll explain that when we do it. But for now, I'm going to use Citadel, which is Games Workshop, their Agrax Earthshade pre-made wash because, well, it goes fast. These run about $7 at your local gaming store, and when you paint them on, it literally fills all the cracks and gives instant texture to your piece. Now, the beautiful thing about washes is, for this I'm not going to do multiple layers, but since they're semi-transparent, you can run multiple layers of a wash and darken out the color. I do that a lot with hair. I'll start with a very light color for my highlights and then do multiple layers of wash to color it out. And I'm just making sure that I've got everything there. And I'm actually using one of my dry brushes for this. And I'll explain the dry brush technique a little bit here today, but I'll go more in depth on a later tutorial with that. Okay, now what I'm doing at this moment is I'm applying a little bit of heat with the heat gun to solidify the washes, because typically washes settle into the cracks in the direction that you want them to paint and that you want them to flow. And I want to make sure that they don't flow anymore after this. And you can see right there, whoops, there's a little dribble on the back of this one. You can see right there what the wash does for the plastic. I'm going to show that to the camera there too. Remember, that was tan. There's that. And now I'm going to go back to working. I'm going to do the gray wash on the tombstones and the platform here and the angels, and we'll pick up in a moment. Okay, Bo, can you get in here and get a little bit of the detail on that?
There we go.
And you can see the detail on the stonework and everything. And then back on me. Now, if you watch that carefully, I was not. Careful, that is. A lot of you will think that I was just slapping paint on there, and that's exactly what I was doing. And I did it basically to show you how easy this is, that anybody can do it. The next part I'm not going to show you. I'm going to touch up the black where I've got some brown on it, and then wait for this to dry, and we'll come back and do the next section, which will be dry brushing and painting the green. And then we'll go on to part 3, which will be actually finishing it out. Okay, the next section that we're going to do is dry brushing. Now, I noticed when stuff was drying that I missed a spot over here. Remember how I said that having a smooth, even texture with these washes didn't matter? I'll show you what I was talking about. I'm going to start out by doing the gray, and that's actually going to be with a kind of dark brown, and then the same tan we started this, the wall and gate with, and then we'll do the gate and wall. We'll start with a pavement. That's the name of the color. It's one of my favorites, and then the slate gray that we used earlier. So don't get mixed up. I'm going to start with a new palette. And when I was talking about the techniques I'll teach you later, this is dry brushing. In essence, you're going to take a brush specifically designed for this. If not, you can get any brush and do it. You dip it in the paint, and then you wipe most of it off. So when you take it at an angle, and you drag it across your surface, and it transfers some of the color over. And when you do that, you end up with a pretty convincing texture. Now I'm going for the undercoat of dark brown. I'm going with a little bit of a wetter brush than I normally would, but that's so I can cover more ground quickly and get a pretty good base coat on here and make it look convincing. And what the dry brushing does is it actually puts paint on all of your highlights, on all of your upper tones. Now, when I did the original gray base coat on this, I told you that getting it smooth didn't matter, and that's because on stone you will have tool marks unless it's very, very, very finely ground. And I'm gonna have Bo come across here real quick, and Bo, I want you to get this section right here so you can see what I'm talking about there. The dry brushing is actually picking up the texture of the paint, which helps make it look like real stone. And if you get streaks, that's fine, because natural stone has inclusions and irregularities. And that's why precision work on this piece is not really necessary, because that precision work would actually make it look unnatural. As you can see, as I do this, starts to take on a weathered stone appearance. Now, some of the places I want to concentrate on are over here. I can do it very lightly and get the edges of those, of the corners and those cracks. And it has the added effect of making this look a little dirty. Now, the next step for this is going to be a light tan just to highlight the edges. As you can see, just a little bit gets your effect. And the reason I stand by the Vallejo surface primer is you can hear my brush striking a little bit. If I did that with another brand of primer, there's a good chance that I would scratch what I've already done. And the surface primer is tough enough that you can be rough with it. Which is exactly what I do for stone, etc. Need a little bit more. And you can concentrate on some of them to give some of them a more defined edge. Make them look like they're a little worn, like right here. And that is how you do that basic stone. And now we're going to go into time lapse. What do you think of that, Bo? now that the dry brushing on the stone is done, those 4 colors actually give it an incredible amount of depth and realism. Now, normally I wouldn't mix the gray and the brown, but this is an old abandoned graveyard, except for the fresh grave, but it adds a certain amount of grunge and decay to it. There are plenty of tutorials online about color choice for stone, and I'll probably do one of those pretty soon, but for this one I didn't. I just knew what I wanted to do. Now the final touch that we're going to do on painting, well, there's 2 final touches. One of them is to dry brush the metal. Normally the way you get a good color on metal is to paint it, same way we did everything else. Paint it a color and then go back and do it with a dark wash and then dry brush it. But this is old wrought iron. So what we're going to do with this is we're going to dry brush it from black, and what we'll get is this lovely aged patina that I can then turn around and add some rust to pretty easily. It literally just takes seconds to do the metal in this piece. Need a bit more silver paint. That's a lot, a bit more. Do the gate. Do the hinges. This is the skull. And the back side. And what we end up with is that. And when we get to the last stage, which will be the 3rd tutorial for this piece and the final tutorial, I will show you exactly how to get the rust. For now, the last step in this tutorial is green, where our grass is going to go, and this is going to go in a montage. Okay. So, as you can see, the painting part of it is done. I may do a couple more things. I may add a brown path here before we come back. I haven't decided yet. I may add a little bit of brown in the grave before we go. But I hurried through this, purposely speeding through, not to show how good I am, not to make anybody feel bad about this stuff, but I did this to show everybody how easy this actually is. People get too worked up about it, get too focused on detail, when in all reality, when you're working with miniatures, the detail's already there. When you're making your terrain, you're building your own detail. But the miniatures themselves have all that detail in there. So just keep in mind, anybody can do this. If I can do this, you can do this. Especially you, George. Join us for part 3 when we finish out the piece. We're going to be using some static grass, some flock, a lot of glue, and we're gonna actually make this look like a grassy field. I've also got some other materials which mimic aggregate, aka stones, and yeah, we'll see you in part 3.